absorbed these documents. I know you didn't.
I did no such thing.
You are out of my mind.
Quiet!
Both of you just be quiet.
You should know, Your Grace, Eliza Marsh said, without looking up from the ash pail. I intend to stay. The door had opened without warning. She had been told he never came to the library before 10. It was 7:30, and she was on her knees at the grate with the brush in one hand and the pail in the other. And when she heard the latch, she did the thing any sensible girl in service 4 days would do. She stood, pressed herself back against the shelves, and looked at the floor. Then she said it anyway. The silence that followed was of a particular quality, the kind that has weight in it. She could hear him breathing from across the room, and the fire catching in the grate she had just laid, and somewhere far outside a bird making its long, descending call across the moor. She made herself look up. He was not what she had prepared for. She had been carrying around, without quite knowing it, some vague composite of a man, a soft thing, a drooping thing, a man made entirely of apology and evasion. What stood at the door of the library was tall and broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, jaw unshaved, shirt open at the throat with ink on the side of his right hand. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been awake for 4 years. He was looking at her as though she had said something in a language he had stopped expecting to hear. "What did you say?" His voice was low and rough, like something that did not get used very often. Eliza tightened her grip on the ash brush. "I said I intend to stay, Your Grace. Mrs. Pell told me the last 3 girls left inside a month. I wanted you to know I'm not planning to." Another silence. He moved into the room and she tracked him without turning her head, over to the window where he stood with his back to the gray light of the moor. "They leave," he said, "because the village frightens them off. I grew up in a village, Your Grace. I know what villages do. They talk. Talking doesn't take anyone's job away." He turned then and looked at her fully, and the expression on his face was not quite what she could name. Not irritation, not amusement. Something older than either. "You walked from the crossroads," he said. 7 miles, yes. The weather wasn't so bad. In March. I've walked worse roads." She hesitated, then said it anyway, because the truth of it had been sitting in her chest since the morning. The driver wouldn't bring his horse past the gate. He didn't want to be seen. Nathaniel Vane, 7th Duke of Ravenscroft, turned back to the window. He was quiet for long enough that Eliza thought she had gone too far, said too much, proven herself unfit for the position in the first 4 minutes of her first real conversation. Then he said, "Mrs. Pell will arrange the cart next time." She took her pail and her brush and she left. But at the door she paused because she could not stop herself, and she said, "The portrait above the east mantel is hanging crooked, Your Grace. The nails pulled out of the plaster," he said without turning. "Leave it. It's the wall's fault, not the picture's." She went out into the corridor and stood there a moment with the pail in both hands, and thought that this was, without question, the strangest morning she had ever had in service. She had known about him before she came. Everyone in Northumberland knew. Nathaniel Vane had married Lady Cassandra Ainsley in a cathedral with 600 witnesses, and 4 years later his wife was dead in Italy with no child and no sign of one. And somewhere in those 4 years, a story had risen like floodwater and settled over the man permanently. They said he could not. They said whatever it is that makes a husband had been simply left out of him. They said Lady Cassandra had wept about it to her sister, and her sister had carried the weeping to London, and London had passed it around until it was no longer a rumor at all, just a known fact, like the distance from Newcastle to Edinburgh, like the coldness of the North Sea. Eliza's own aunt had said it at the kitchen table without bothering to lower her voice. Poor creature, all that land and no use for it. Eliza had not thought much about it then. It was someone else's misfortune, and she had enough of her own. Her father was dead and had left them nothing but a name and a debt. Her brother Tom was in Newcastle doing what Tom always did, which was to look at a problem and decide the fastest way through it was to make the problem worse. He had owed £40 to men who broke fingers for less, and by the time Eliza had walked through every respectable door within 30 miles looking for a position, the £40 had become 41. Greyhurst had written back in 4 days. The wages were double what a housemaid could expect. She had known standing at the crossroads with her bag in both hands and the moor coming at her from every direction, that this ought to mean something. Houses did not pay double wages for clean grates and dusted shelves, but she had 11 shillings in her pocket and a brother in Newcastle, and so she had walked. The servants' hall at Greyhurst was warm in the evenings, and louder than she expected for a house half shut up. There were 8 of them in service, fewer than the house wanted, more than the house usually kept, and they ate together at a long table near the kitchen. And by the end of her first week, Eliza had learned that the particular social economy of any servants' hall is established not by the housekeeper, but by whoever talks the most and the loudest. At Greyhurst, this was Nan Boole. Nan did the upstairs linen and had a mouth, Mrs. Pell had said, on the first day, like a torn sack. This turned out to be accurate. Nan was 22 and handsome, and entirely aware of it, and she had a particular talent, developed Eliza suspected over some years, for finding the thing most likely to make a room laugh and delivering it at the precise moment when the room was readiest to. On the Tuesday of Eliza's second week, Nan did the voice. Everyone at the table knew the voice. It was meant to be him, the Duke, their employer, and Nan had worked it up into a kind of performance, a pantomime of hesitation and apology and elaborate incapacity that had the whole table going before she had reached the second line. She held her hands up. She rolled her eyes back in their sockets, she said, in a voice pitched low and strangled. And then he says, "Madam, I regret I am indisposed." The table erupted. 2 of the kitchen girls were weeping with it. Eliza set her cup down. She did not plan what she said next. It simply came out of her, flat and cold, the way water comes out of stone when the frost thaws. "He paid for your mother's coffin." The laughter did not stop all at once. It came apart slowly, one voice at a time, until the only sound in the room was the fire in the kitchen grate, and Nan Boole still sitting with her hands in the air, and her face going carefully, steadily red. Eliza heard her own voice fill the silence. "On my second day," Mrs. Pell told me. "The estate paid it and never sent a bill. So he's a man who buries your mother and asks nothing back, and you sit here and do a voice about what he can't do in his own bed. For men who'd have let her go in the parish pit, I noticed nobody does any voices. Nobody said anything at all." "Eat your supper," said Mrs. Pell from the far end of the table, without looking up. They ate their supper. Eliza went up to her room afterwards with her ears burning and her hands not quite steady, and she sat on the edge of the narrow iron bed and stared at the wall and tried to locate one good reason why she had done it. She had been in service 11 days. She had made an enemy of the girl who did the linen for the sake of a man who would not have known her surname a fortnight ago. Pride, she told herself. You were defending your own good sense. You took the position. You'd look a fool if the position were as bad as they make it sound. It was a reasonable explanation. She did not believe a single word of it. The parcel appeared on her bed on the Friday. Brown paper, string, no card. Inside, a pair of boots, good ones. The leather worked and soft, the soles thick enough to last years on stone. Her size, or close enough that someone had measured it carefully. Underneath the boots, folded, was a wool shawl the color of dark moss, the kind of green that belongs to the moor in late spring when the light is low. At the bottom of the paper, one line in a hand she did not know yet. Hard, slanting, the letters pressed in as though the pen were doing something difficult. The East Road floods until May. Eliza sat on the bed with the boots in her lap for a long time. She had said one sentence about walking. Once, 4 days in a room she had not been supposed to enter at that hour, to a man who had been reading a ledger and appeared not to be listening at all. She put the boots on, they fitted exactly. She stood in the middle of her cold little room in a dead woman's house, wearing boots that a man everyone in England laughed at had thought to buy her, and Eliza Marsh felt the first crack open in something she had spent 23 years building. That careful, load-bearing architecture that kept her expectations at the level where they could not hurt her. She did not know what to do with the crack. She left it there and went down to lay the morning fires. April came late to the moor that year. But it came. The house changed with it in ways Eliza had not expected. Shutters unlatched, carpets hauled out to the line, two men from the village appearing without announcement to cut back the ivy on the east wing, which had been advancing on the stone since before Eliza was born. Mrs. Pell watched them from the kitchen doorway with an expression Eliza could not read. The kitchen talked of the ivy men for 2 days, as though something had shifted in the house's weather that the ivy represented, and its removal now confirmed. Mrs. Pell moved Eliza off the grates and onto the library. She delivered the news the way she delivered everything, as a fact that had arrived from elsewhere and required no discussion. You'll do the books. Dust, don't tidy. He knows where everything is, and he'll know if you've moved it. So Eliza did the books. He was there most of the day. She had prepared herself to find this unbearable and found instead that it was not. He did not talk at her, and he did not exactly ignore her either. There was a quality to the silence between them that was not uncomfortable. More like two people who had, without discussing it, arrived at the same understanding of what the room was for. Sometimes an hour would pass with nothing but the fire and the scratch of his pen, and then he would say something apropos of no conversation she could trace. "The Ainsley portrait is crooked," he said one morning. "It's the wall, Your Grace. The wall's moved." A pause, then, "Leave it. It suits her better crooked." She glanced up at the portrait above the east mantel, a handsome woman in gray silk, expression composed into careful pleasantness. She looked, Eliza thought, like someone who had spent years deciding exactly how much to let anyone see. She went back to the shelves without saying anything. Some things were better left hanging. At the end of her first month, she counted her wages, wrote down 41 pounds and 6 shillings in the small notebook she kept at the back of her trunk, and thought about what a year looked like, and then 2 years, and then how many years it would take at double wages to clear the number entirely. The arithmetic was not friendly, but it was possible. She was beginning, quietly and against her better judgment, to think that possible was enough. Mr. Sowerby arrived on the 12th of April with 2 trunks and a letter of introduction on behalf of Lord Gideon Vane to review the condition of the estate. Eliza learned 3 things about Lord Gideon in the space of one supper. He was Nathaniel's cousin. He had not set foot in Greyhurst since the funeral 4 years prior, and if the Duke died without a son, every stone of the house and every acre of its land went to him. Every stone, Nan Boulay said, from the far end of the table, with her chin in her hand. And for once, nobody at the table laughed at all. Sowerby himself was a smooth, pink, pleasant man who said good morning to the servants and remembered their names and seemed to find everything at Greyhurst rather charming. Eliza distrusted him inside 24 hours and could not have given a clean reason why until the 4th night when she was coming down the west corridor with an armful of linen and he stepped out of the blue room doorway directly into her path. "Miss Marsh," he said in that pleasant way, and he put his hand on her waist. It was not violent. That was somehow the worst part. The casualness of it, the same easy reach a man uses to take a glass off a passing tray. "You're wasted up here," he said. "Lord Gideon keeps a good house in London. You'd not be carrying sheets." Eliza stood perfectly still. Every fact she owned was in the corridor with her. 11 shillings. A brother in Newcastle. This man writing reports to the man who would one day own this house. The report Sowerby would send in the morning, regardless of what she said right now. "Take your hand off me," she said. He laughed. He did not move his hand. She never found out what she would have done next because at the end of the corridor a door opened. Sowerby's hand came away so fast it was nearly comic. The Duke of Ravenscroft came up that corridor without hurrying and without raising his voice, and Eliza afterward could not remember him saying anything to Sowerby at all. He simply arrived and stood and looked, and the pink man began talking very quickly about having taken the wrong turning to the stair. "The stair is behind you," Nathaniel said. Sowerby went. Then there was only the corridor and the linen, and the 2 of them, and Eliza discovered that her hands had started shaking now that it was over, which struck her as extremely poor timing. "He'll be gone in the morning," Nathaniel said. "Your Grace," she said, "before he writes to your cousin, he'll report this his own way." Yes, so don't. Not for me. She hitched the linen higher. I'll keep out of his road. It's 4 more days. And here was the thing she would turn over for weeks afterward. He did not tell her she was being foolish. He did not say, "Leave it to me," which in her experience were the 4 words men used immediately before doing whatever they had already decided. He said, "What do you want done?" She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "It happened to you. Tell me what you want, and I will do exactly that thing and nothing else. If you want him gone tonight, he is gone tonight, and Gideon can write whatever he likes. If you want him left alone, I'll leave him alone, and you won't be in a corridor by yourself again while he's under this roof. Either is easy. I'm only not going to choose it for you." Nobody had ever said that to her. Not once, not about anything. Not in 23 years. "Gone tonight," she said. Sowerby was gone within the hour. It was Eliza who asked for the estate ledgers, 2 weeks later. She framed it as simple curiosity. She had kept her father's books from the age of 11. She was good with numbers. She would not touch anything. She only wanted to look. Nathaniel slid the books across the long table without a word, which she took for assent. She found the thing on the 3rd day. She sat with her finger on a line in the 3rd ledger, reading it twice to be certain. And then she got up and went to where he was working at the far end of the table. "Who is Lady Honoria Ainsley to you?" she said. He did not look up. "Cassandra's sister. Why do you pay her £340 a year?" Now he looked up. 200, he said. "It's the marriage settlement. The wife's family keeps an annuity. It doesn't lapse when the wife dies. It's ordinary. It was 200. Eliza turned the ledger to face him and put her finger on the entry. "In the year you were in Italy, it went to 280. 2 years after that, it went to 340. She paused. "You didn't authorize either increase." The room went quiet in a different way than it usually did. "Gideon was trustee while I was abroad," Nathaniel said slowly. "He still has authority over the London accounts. I never revoked it. That's not the part that kept me awake." She pulled the 2nd ledger across, opened it where she had pressed her ribbon. "These are the dates. The first increase, March of the year you were away, is the same month Mrs. Pell says the letters started arriving, the ones about your condition. She asked me twice to be certain. The second increase is within a month of the last time the story went around the county fresh, when the Ellaby girl's mother wrote to take her out of service here." She looked up at him. "He is paying her, Nathaniel. Out of your money. To keep saying it." Nathaniel Vane sat back in his chair, and the expression on his face was one she had not seen before. Not surprise, not anger. Something colder than either. The face of a man arriving at a conclusion he should have reached years ago and had not let himself look at directly. "He inherits," Eliza said, "if you die without a son. And a man who has known for 4 years that you can't get one has had 4 years of knowing exactly what he stands to be worth. You can't leave that to luck, not if you're careful. So every time the story starts going quiet, it gets a little help. And the help costs him nothing, because it comes out of your own pocket." "You cannot prove intent from a ledger," Nathaniel said. "No, but you can prove the dates. And once a man has seen the dates, he can never unsee them." She closed the ledger. "And neither can anyone he tells." She thought that was all of it. She thought the worst of it was already in the room, already named, already being looked at in the clear way that names and light tend to dispel things. She was wrong. The letter from Newcastle arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Eliza was in the library when Mrs. Pell brought it up. She recognized Tom's handwriting on the outside, cramped and slanting, the hand of a man who had always found writing an act of physical resistance, and she took it to the window to read it. She read it standing up. She did not sit down afterward. Tom's debt had been purchased. All of it, the entire £41 and 6 shillings, acquired in a single lot by an agent acting for a gentleman who had not given his name. The new holder was in no hurry. There was only one thing the new holder wanted in exchange, and Tom had written it down faithfully because he did not understand what he was transcribing. "They want to know, is it true about you and the Duke? They said if you was to put your name to a paper about how it come about, the debt goes, Liza. I don't see the harm. It's only saying what happened." Eliza folded the letter. She folded it again. She put it in her apron pocket. Then she stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the moor, and she thought about her brother's handwriting, the careful, innocent wrongness of it. And she thought about 41 pounds and 6 shillings, and she thought about the morning she had stood in the same room and said, "I intend to stay." At the end of the corridor, a door opened. She heard Nathaniel's step on the stone floor, unhurried, familiar by now. She knew that sound the way she knew the sound of the east wind finding the gap in the window frame. She folded the letter a third time and kept it in her pocket. She folded the letter a third time and went through the rest of the day in the mechanical way she had learned years ago, when there was something she needed not to think about until the work was finished. She laid the library fire. She counted the shelves she had done and the ones still left. She carried down the ash pail and brought up fresh kindling and did not, in the 2 times she passed through the study doorway where Nathaniel sat working, say anything at all. That night the rain came in off the sea. The real spring rain, not the cold drizzle the moor produced all winter, but something with weight in it, something that hit the west face of the house like a decision. Eliza could not sleep. She lay in the blue room. Mrs. Pell had moved her without comment when the April light started coming through the west windows, and listened to the rain find every loose joint in the window frame. And she thought about 41 pounds, and she thought about the look on Tom's face the last time she had seen him, and she thought about the document she was going to be asked to sign. At 2 in the morning she gave up and went down for water, and found the library door open and the fire still going, and Nathaniel sitting in front of it with a glass in his hand. He did not look round when she came in. "Miss Marsh, I'll come back in the morning, Your Grace. Stay a moment." He turned the glass slowly in his fingers. The rain went over the windows in sheets. "I owe you the truth of something," he said. "Before anything else happens with Gideon, there is a thing you should know." He looked down at the glass. "About Cassandra. About what I told you the night of the storm. What I said about not knowing whether it was true, about me, or only the truth of that house and that woman." She turned on the settle and watched him. The voice was low and he was choosing the words carefully. "I have been sitting here for 2 hours," he said, "deciding whether to say this, and I have decided that I will, because I would rather you know it plainly than find it out sideways, the way I have found out most things that matter." He set the glass down. "I know now that it was only the truth of that house." He looked at the fire. "Peel told me in the spring of the year she went to Italy. I did not believe him then, because 4 years is a long time to be told something, and I had been told it very thoroughly." He was quiet for a moment. "I believe him now, because of you." He said it in the same tone he might use to note that the wall had moved, or that the Ainsley portrait hung crooked, as a fact that required nothing except acknowledgement. "Because you were honest with me, and I have been learning since you came to believe honest things." Eliza sat in the chair near the hearth and listened to the rain. He did not look at her while he said it, and she did not look at him, and neither of them said anything more for a long time. After a while he banked the fire. She went back up to the blue room and stood at the window and watched the rain lighten toward dawn, and she thought that there was no amount of arithmetic that made the next few days simple, and that the things she had felt cracking open since the night of the boots had now opened wide enough that she could not pretend it was ordinary. The woman came the next evening. Not a man this time. A woman, plainly dressed, who arrived at the servants' entrance and asked for Eliza Marsh specifically, with a message to deliver in person. Mrs. Pell came up to the library with a look on her face that Eliza had not seen before, a look of careful, contained unease. The woman waited in the lower passage for 20 minutes before Eliza went down to her. She had a card, no name, only an address in the village and a time. Thursday, 9:30, when Eliza's morning duties in the library were done, and the hour before luncheon preparation was technically her own. "Come alone," the woman said. "He would like to speak with you. It will not take long." Eliza looked at the card for a moment. Then she tucked it into her apron next to Tom's letter and said, "Tell him I'll be there." The address on the card led to a private room above the village inn. 3 chairs, a table, a fire that had been recently laid and was burning too hard for the size of the space. The woman who had come to Greyhurst was gone. In her place stood a man Eliza had not met, a thin, composed man in excellent clothes who introduced himself as Mr. Aldrich, Lord Gideon Vane's secretary, in from London, very pleased to make her acquaintance. Won't you sit? She sat. Aldrich did not sit. He stood by the fire with his hands behind him and looked at her in the pleasant, appraising way of someone whose job is to assess things for value. My employer is concerned, he said, for his cousin's welfare. His Grace of Ravenscroft has been some years in difficult circumstances, and there are those who would take advantage of that. He paused. We have recently become aware that a member of the household staff has been given unusual access to the estate's account books. I work in the library, Eliza said. His Grace asked me to look at the ledgers. Of course. Aldrich picked up a document from the table. She had not noticed it lying there, which meant it had been placed deliberately where she would not. A woman in your situation, he said, can easily be misunderstood, especially a woman who came to this house without references, who was given a room above the servants' quarters within 2 months of arrival, who has made herself rather indispensable to a man who is, by all accounts, not entirely in possession of his usual judgment. Eliza looked at the fire. We are not enemies, Aldrich said. On the contrary, my employer is prepared to be very generous. He set the document on the table in front of her. It was 1 page, closely written, and at the bottom there was a line for a signature. She did not read it all. She read the first paragraph and the last, and understood the shape of the thing without needing the middle. It was a statement. To the effect that Eliza Marsh, housemaid of Greyhurst Abbey, had formed an inappropriate personal attachment to her employer and had used her access to the household to encourage and facilitate a relationship of an unsuitable nature with a man in a weakened mental and emotional state following bereavement, that she had done so knowingly and with intent to benefit herself financially. In exchange for her signature, Mr. Thomas Marsh's debts would be discharged in full. She herself would receive a sum sufficient to establish herself elsewhere. Aldrich named the figure, and a letter of character, though not from Greyhurst. She would leave the estate by nightfall. If she declined, Mr. Thomas Marsh would be delivered to his creditors, who were no longer the patient sort, within the week. And Aldrich had spoken with 3 households in the county, all of whom were willing to confirm that a girl of Eliza's description had applied for a position and been found upon inquiry to be unsuitable in character. He said all of this in a pleasant, even voice, the voice of a man explaining a timetable. Eliza did not say anything for a while. The room was small and the fire was too hot, and the chair beneath her was straight-backed wood, and she sat in it as though she were built into it, spine upright, hands in her lap. The letter from Tom and the address card both folded in her apron pocket. She had sat in worse places. She had sat at her father's kitchen table the morning after he died and added up numbers that did not add up and made the decisions that had to be made because there was no one else to make them. She had sat in the offices of 3 solicitors who told her, in different ways, that the name her father had left them was the only thing he had left, and names did not, as a rule, pay debts. She was used to rooms that wanted something from her. She looked at the document on the table. She looked at the line at the bottom of it. She thought about Tom, about the particular quality of his handwriting in the letter she still carried, the way he pressed too hard on the pen nib because he had never learned to hold it right, the way he had written "I don't see the harm" because he genuinely did not, because Tom had never in his life been able to see the harm in a thing until the harm was already done. She thought about £41 and 6 shillings, and she thought about the stable at Morpeth, where men waited for debtors, and she thought about what happened after that, and she thought about a pair of boots left on a bed with no card. She thought about a man standing 8 feet away on the other side of a hearth rug, hands behind his back, telling her, "There is nothing you can do in this room that will change 1 penny of it." She thought about what it had cost him to say that, and what kind of man says it. Then she thought about what it would cost her to pick up that pen. Not the position. She knew that was gone either way. That a woman who had seen those ledger dates and spoken them aloud in Nathaniel's presence was already past the point of being quietly managed back into ordinariness. Not even the money, though the money was real and the lack of it was realer. What she would be paying for was something she had only just learned she had. The right to say, when she was old and it was over, that she had been the kind of person who did not sign that paper. The right to have looked someone who deserved it in the face and told him the truth about his own books. The right to have stood in the corridor on that April night and been asked what she wanted and answered honestly. These were not the kinds of things that bought bread. She knew that. She folded her hands together in her lap. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "I won't be signing that." He waited. He was clearly experienced in people who began with refusal. The shape of his patience said, "Continue." "I know what you're going to say next," she said. "My brother." "I know." She breathed in through her nose. "I am asking you to consider one thing before you send those letters. When a man buys a girl's brother's debts 3 weeks after she enters service, and then sends a representative to her with a paper to sign, those two events are related, and any competent person can demonstrate that they are." She looked at him steadily. "I have been keeping the estate books for 6 weeks. I have learned a great deal about how dates relate to each other." Aldrich's expression did not change. "You're a housemaid reading household accounts," he said. "That is not a competent person by the definition of any court in England." "No, but a physician with 22 years of practice in Newcastle and London is." She stood up. "And a housekeeper who has kept the household letter book for 19 years is." She smoothed her apron. "Good morning, Mr. Aldrich. I'll see myself out." She walked out of that room and down the stairs and into the cold morning air of the village with her hands entirely steady in her knees. She discovered when she reached the road, not steady at all. She stood on the road for a moment and breathed. The moor lay open on all sides, brown and vast, the sky pressing down flat and gray overhead. The wind came off it smelling of peat and cold stone and the particular loneliness of large empty places. She had grown up on a moor not unlike this one, and she had never found it comforting in the way people in novels seem to, but she had always found it honest. It did not pretend to be anything it wasn't. It was just the moor getting on with the business of being the moor, and everything on it survived or didn't. Tom would not manage well in Morpeth. She knew that too. He was not built for hardship in the way that she was. He bent rather than held. He broke rather than bent. 4 years she had spent being angry at him for exactly this, and 4 years had not made her any less clear that it was true, and it had not, as far as she could tell, made her love him any less either. She thought, "I can earn £22 a year. I can earn it somewhere. I can write to him every week. I can find a solicitor who will deal honestly with his new creditors. I can do all of those things." She pressed her hands flat against her sides. She could not sign the paper. That was the simple, final truth of it. She could not put her name to the thing they had written. Not because she was brave, not because she was noble, but because she had been on her knees at that grate on a cold March morning and stood up and said, "I intend to stay," and she had meant it. And the only way she could mean it still was if she meant it about the kind of person she was, not just the house. She thought about what it had cost Nathaniel. Not the money, not the title, but the specific cost of being stripped, for 4 years, of the right to be believed about his own life. She had watched it, in the months she had been at Greyhurst, the way a person watches a thing heal, the slow unclenching of it, the way he had started, when she was in the room, to say more than was strictly necessary. The way he had asked the first time, "What do you want done?" as though he had been waiting years for someone who required him to ask. She thought about a pair of boots on a bed with no card. She thought about Honoria Ainsley, who had told a grief-softened lie to her friends once, not understanding that a man with Gideon's particular kind of patience and foresight was already listening, already calculating how much the lie was worth, already planning the mechanism by which the lie would become permanent and useful and paid for out of someone else's pocket. She did not blame Honoria. She could not manage it, even now. Honoria had been frightened and ashamed, and she had done what frightened, ashamed people do. She had found words that made the shame point in a different direction. That Gideon had caught those words and built a system out of them was not Honoria's fault. Not entirely, but it was not Nathaniel's fault either. And for 4 years, the fault had landed entirely on him, and now someone wanted Eliza to add her name to the weight of it. She could not. The moor did not care about any of this. It went on being the moor. She started walking back toward Greyhurst. By the time she reached the gate, she had made two decisions. The first was that she would tell Nathaniel everything. Not the edited version, not the version that left out the price Gideon was asking, but all of it, including the document and what it said, and the line at the bottom where her name would have gone. She was done managing this alone. The second was that she would not cry until she was in her own room, with the door shut, and not before. She managed the first. The second she nearly lost in the corridor outside the library, when Mrs. Pell came round the corner with her letter book and took one look at Eliza's face and said nothing. Just put one hand briefly on her shoulder as she passed. The lightest possible pressure. Gone before Eliza had quite registered it. She did not cry in the corridor. She went into the library and Nathaniel was at the table, and he looked up and she said, "Your cousin has bought my brother," and she told him the rest of it without sitting down. He heard all of it without interrupting. She had not expected that. She had prepared for the interruptions, the reassurances, the masculine instinct to take over a problem the moment it was put into words, to convert someone else's crisis into a matter of logistics and contacts. She had been composing polite, firm ways of saying, "Let me finish," for the last half mile of her walk back, and none of them were needed. Nathaniel Vane sat at the long table and listened, and when she reached the part about the document, what it said, what it accused her of, what it offered in exchange for her name, his jaw tightened once, briefly, and then his face went still again. He waited until she was fully done before he said anything. Then he said, "You should have told me about Tom when the first letter came. I know. You went to meet his man alone. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me now? Not what do you want me to do? Not let me handle it. What do you need?" She had noticed over the months that this was how he spoke, precisely, carefully leaving room. It was a habit that must have cost him something to learn, in a house where there had been no reason to practice it. "I need you to let me be the one who speaks when Gideon comes," she said. "I need you to trust that I know what I found in the books and how to present it. And I need Dr. Peel. He is in Newcastle. I can write today." She nodded. "And I need one more week with the ledgers." She got two. Dr. Ambrose Peel arrived on a Thursday without warning, which was apparently his preferred method of travel. He was a small, cheerful, damp man in spectacles who drove up the road in a hired trap with two fishing rods sticking out the back. And by the time he had reached the entrance hall, three separate theories had completed a circuit of the kitchen. That the Duke was gravely ill, that there was to be a legal examination of some kind, and, from Nan Boulay in a horrified whisper over the potatoes, that Eliza was expecting, and the physician had been sent for to deal with it. Peel, who knew nothing of any of this, stood in the hall dripping from the rain and said, "Vane, your road is an absolute disgrace, and I have come for the trout." He stayed 9 days. He caught 4 fish. He complained at length and with great energy about the moor, the wind, the distance from a decent chemist, and every horse he was offered. And Nathaniel laughed more in those 9 days than Eliza had heard in the 6 months prior combined. On the 6th evening, she found Peel alone on the terrace, wrapped in 2 coats, watching the light leave the fell with an expression of extreme suspicion. He shifted along the bench without being asked. "Miss Marsh, sit. You want to ask me something? Everyone in this house has wanted to ask me something since Thursday, and none of you has the nerve." She sat down. "You examined him," she said. "Years ago." "I did." He took his spectacles off and polished them on the inner coat's lapel. "And there has never been one single thing wrong with that man," he said, "except the woman he was married to. I told him so in the spring of the year she went to Italy. He thanked me very politely and did not believe a word of it." He replaced the spectacles. "You cannot prescribe a person out of being told for 4 years that they are repellent, Miss Marsh. I have no drops for that. I said as much, which was of no use to anyone, and then I went home." "He still didn't believe you then," she said. "He didn't." "He does now, apparently." Peel gave her a sideways look, uncomplicated and entirely without embarrassment. "I have known Nathaniel Vane since we were 19 years old, and I have never once in all that time heard him whistle. He paused. Do with that what you please. She did. Lord Gideon Vane came up the drive on the 21st of June in a carriage with his own crest on the door, which struck Eliza, watching from the library window, as a particular kind of statement. A man arriving to inspect a property he expected to own, making sure everyone on the gravel could see the crest. He was tall, well-made, with a way of holding himself that said he was accustomed to being the most impressive thing in most rooms. Behind him, Lady Honoria Ainsley descended from the carriage in half-mourning she had no business still wearing 4 years on, and pressed her handkerchief to her face before she had both feet on the gravel. They had tea in the long drawing room because Eliza had asked for it to be the long drawing room, with the far doors standing open, and Dr. Peel seated at a small writing table near the window, with a pocketbook and a pencil, which he had agreed without being asked to use as inconspicuously as possible. Gideon waited until the second cup. He was too polished to rush. I'll be plain, cousin, he said, setting down his saucer, since we are family. There is talk. There has been talk for years, and I have defended you faithfully in it. He spread his fingers on the tablecloth. But the talk has changed lately, and I find I cannot defend the newer kind. A gentleman of my acquaintances put off the estate in an hour at a housemaid's word. The housemaid is moved to the blue room. The estate books are taken out of the steward's hands and given to the same housemaid to read. He looked at Nathaniel with something that, on a less practiced face, might have been grief. A man in isolation after great loss may not always see how things appear from outside. It seems to me, as the person who must one day answer for this property, that there would be no shame at all in the London accounts remaining under a trustee's care for your protection. Nothing more than that. Eliza felt Nathaniel go rigid beside her. He had 4 inches and 15 years of hard riding on his cousin, and for about 2 seconds the room was very close to something irreversible. She touched his sleeve, barely the lightest possible contact, and he looked at her, and she gave him the smallest possible nod, and Nathaniel Vane sat back in his chair. Lady Honoria, Eliza said, may I ask about your annuity? Honoria stopped mid-reach for her teacup. Your annuity from this estate, Eliza said pleasantly. It was set at £200 in your sister's marriage settlement, which is entirely ordinary, and no one in this room begrudges you a penny of it. She opened the ledger on the table in front of her. In March of the year His Grace was in Italy, it rose to 280. He did not authorize that increase. He was in Italy. Lord Gideon authorized it as trustee. She turned the page. 2 years after that it rose again, to 340. Also Lord Gideon, also as trustee. Gideon's voice had lost some of its warmth. This is a housemaid reading household books, he said. This is nothing. It's dates, Eliza said. That's all it is. She kept her voice even. Now that March when the annuity first rose, Mrs. Pell has kept this household's letter book for 19 years. The letters about His Grace's condition begin arriving at Greyhurst that same month. The first letter is dated the 9th. The annuity increase is dated the 14th. She let that sit in the room for a moment before she continued. And the second increase falls within 5 weeks of the last time the story went round this county fresh, when the Ellaby girl was taken out of service by her mother. Honoria's teacup was back on its saucer. She had gone very still. I cannot prove why a man does a thing, Eliza said. I can only put down when he did it and when it was useful, and let the room do the arithmetic. She looked at Gideon steadily. Would you like me to read the dates again, my lord? More slowly. There is a doctor sitting behind you, Nathaniel said quietly, who has been writing them into his pocketbook this past minute and a half. Gideon turned around. Ambrose Peel, said Peel cheerfully, looking up over his spectacles. Physician, 22 years, Newcastle, and London. I examined the Duke of Ravenscroft in the spring of 18 years ago, at his own request, and found him entirely sound. I told him so. I told his late wife's physician so. And I have said so to every man who has had the courtesy to ask me in the 11 years since. He paused. Nobody ever has, my lord. Not once. In 11 years, not one person who repeated that particular story thought to ask the only man in England who would actually know. Isn't that remarkable? Lady Honoria stood up. She stood up so fast her chair went over behind her, a crack against the floorboards that cut through everything else in the room. Her face had gone the color of the paper napkin in her hand. She was looking at Gideon. Not at Nathaniel, not at Eliza, only at Gideon. And when she spoke, her voice had dropped to something barely audible. "You said it would only be letters," she said. "Honoria, you said it would only be letters. You said write to Nathaniel's man in London, once. Confirm what I had already told my mother's friends, and you would see to the rest. You said it would protect me." She was pressing the handkerchief against her lips. "From the questions. From what people would say about why there was no child, why she died in Italy without him. Why?" Her voice broke. "You said no one would ever know I had said anything at all. And that was it. Not in the ledger. Not even in writing anywhere. In the shaking of Honoria Ainsley's hands and the white of her face, and 5 words that had come out of her before she could calculate whether to let them. You said it would only be letters." Gideon stood. He took his time about it. He was always going to be the kind of man who took his time, who controlled the pace of things, who did not give anything away for free. At the door he stopped. He looked back at Eliza, and there was no warmth left in his face at all. No pretense. Nothing but the calculation stripped bare. "Your brother," he said, "owes £41 and 6 shillings. I hold every note. Say one word of what passed in this room outside this room, and Thomas Marsh will be in Morpeth jail before Michaelmas. He will not come out again, Miss Marsh. You will have put him there, and you will know it." Nathaniel came up out of his chair. "Sit down," Eliza said, without turning her head. "Please." He sat down. She stood up. "My lord," she said, "my brother is a fool, and he has been a fool since he was 15, and I have been paying for it in installments my entire adult life." She kept her voice even and her hands at her sides. £41 and 6 shillings. I earn £22 a year. I will have it to you in 3 years if I'm careful. And I am always careful." Gideon's expression did not change. "Or," she said, "you want me to sign a paper saying I walked into this house and got a damaged man into bed and made a duchess of myself out of it." She tilted her head slightly. "I'd rather my brother sat in Morpeth, and so would he, if he understood what he'd signed, which he never has and never will." She picked up the ledger and closed it. "Go home, my lord. You're not going to jail him. The moment you do, everyone will ask why a man goes to that trouble over £40, and then someone will look at the dates." Lord Gideon Vane left Greyhurst Abbey at 23 minutes past 4 and did not look back. He was not gone for long. The world beyond Greyhurst's gates was not finished with the matter, and Gideon Vane, who was nothing if not resourceful, had understood within a day that he could not repeat what had happened in the drawing room. He could not explain Honoria's 5 words. He could not explain the ledger dates or the physician's testimony or the chair still lying on its side in the middle of the floor when the maid came in to clear tea. So he told a different story instead, and he told it well, the way men of his kind always could. In the right rooms to the right people, with just enough specificity to sound like a man who had been personally injured rather than personally exposed. "There was a woman at Ravenscroft," he said, "a servant. She had the estate books out of the steward's hands and a gentleman off the estate in an hour, and she had stood up in a drawing room and read out a lady's private annuity figures in front of a physician, and poor Honoria had not been seen in company since. The county listened with tremendous interest. Within 2 weeks, the shape of the story had shifted entirely. She was clever, she was cold, she had the Duke completely under her management. The old story, the rumor about what a husband does and does not do, found itself crowded out by this newer, more interesting version, which had the significant advantage of containing a woman with a ledger and opinions, which was always going to hold an audience longer than a man's private difficulties. Nobody after that said any more that the Duke of Ravenscroft was half a man. Partly because Ambrose Peel made himself extremely and deliberately tedious on the subject at 4 separate dinners over the following month, dropping his testimony into the conversation with the cheerful persistence of a man who genuinely does not understand why anyone would find this boring. And partly because the story had simply found something better to be about. But in the week between Gideon's departure and the county's revision of its understanding, Tom Marsh was taken. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not from Tom, but from Tom's landlord in Newcastle, who had been present when two men came for the debt in the morning. Tom had gone with them. He had not had much choice. He was in a holding room near the quayside, and the landlord did not know how long for, and he had thought Miss Marsh ought to know. Eliza read the letter at the kitchen table. Connaissance. Pell was there, and she read it over Eliza's shoulder without being invited, and then she set her hand flat on the table and said, "How much?" £41.06. Mrs. Pell went to find her household savings box without another word. It was not enough on its own. It was £17 which Mrs. Pell had been adding to for 23 years, which was the entirety of what she had, and Eliza knew it, and Mrs. Pell knew she knew it, and neither of them said anything about it. She was still sitting at the table when Nathaniel came in. He had the letter in his hand, his own, delivered the same morning, from Gideon's solicitor, confirming the debt and naming the sum and adding, as a kind of afterthought, that the creditor was prepared to be patient if certain assurances were forthcoming about the management of the Ravenscroft estate. Nathaniel set the letter on the table beside Eliza's. He looked at them both for a moment. Then he said, "I'll clear it today." "No," Eliza said. He looked at her. "No." She folded her hands. "I know what you're thinking. It's £40, it's nothing. You could send a man to Newcastle this afternoon and Tom could sleep in his own bed tonight." She looked up. "And if you do that, Gideon wins. Not the money. He was never after the money. He was after proof that you'll pay whatever it costs to keep me here, because that's the paper he couldn't get me to sign." She shook her head. "If you clear Tom's debt, it says everything the paper was meant to say, and it says it in your name, not mine." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathaniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which was not something dukes generally did in kitchens, and Mrs. Pell did not remark on it, and neither did Eliza. "What do you want done?" he said. She had been waiting, she realized, without quite knowing it, to hear him say that again. "I want to go to Newcastle myself," she said. "I want to bring the money and what I have, what Mrs. Pell has, and I want to speak with the creditors directly. And I want to tell Tom in person what he owes and what it is worth and what he is going to do to repay it. Because if I put it in a letter, he will lose the letter, and if you tell him, he will not understand why it matters." "He will not understand it from you either," Nathaniel said, but his voice was almost gentle about it. "No, but he'll know I'm not angry. That's the part that matters with Tom." The journey to Newcastle took a day and a half. Nathaniel came with her, which she had not asked for and did not refuse. They sat opposite each other in the coach for most of it, without speaking, not from discomfort, but from the particular ease of people who have stopped needing to fill silence with proof that they are comfortable. At Morbeth, Eliza went into the holding room alone. Tom was in the corner of a room that smelled of damp stone and old smoke, sitting on a bench with his elbows on his knees and his head down. He looked up when she came in, and for a moment he looked the way he had looked at 15, before the gambling and the bad decisions and the particular exhaustion of living with the consequences, before all of it made him someone she was always half braced for. "Liza," he said. His voice was rough. I didn't know what the paper was, I swear I didn't." "I know," she said. "She paid the debt." Not all at once. She had £21 between her own savings and Mrs. Pell's 17, and she explained to the creditor's agent, in the plain and specific voice she had learned from years of arithmetic, exactly how the remaining sum would be paid, and on what schedule, and what she was prepared to do if the schedule was not honored on his end. The agent looked at her for a long moment. Then he said she might as well be the Duke's solicitor, and she said she was not. She was the woman who kept the Duke's books, and he let Tom go. In the coaching yard outside, with the smell of horses and coal smoke, and the river somewhere underneath all of it, Tom stood next to her and looked at his boots. "He's going to pay the rest, isn't he?" Tom said. "The Duke." "No," Eliza said. "You are." She turned to look at him, and something in her face must have been clear enough, because he met her eyes properly for the first time. "You're going to come to Greyhurst and work in the stables. 9 shillings a week. You'll have it paid in 4 years." Tom said nothing. You'll be steadier at the end of it than you've ever been, she said. Not because of the money, because you did it yourself. They stood in the coaching yard in the gray morning, and Tom looked at the sky and finally said, in a very quiet voice, "Is it a good house?" "Yes," she said. "It's a good house." He came. It took Tom 3 weeks and 2 letters to arrive, but he came and he worked, and by the end of the first winter, he had stopped asking anyone for anything and started tentatively to be someone who did not need to. Eliza said yes to Nathaniel in September, on the ridge above Fell Bottom with half of Northumberland brown and green below them, the wind taking the words nearly out of her mouth the moment she said them. He went very still, the way he always did when something surprised him, and then he looked at her for a long moment with the expression she had spent 6 months learning to read. She had told him no the first time he asked. She had told him why, told him plainly, the way she told him everything, that the story was not finished yet, that what people said still mattered in the ways that mattered most, that she was not marrying into a name that everyone in the county had already decided how to tell. He had listened, he had not argued. He had ridden her down to the low fields instead and shown her the drainage project. £4,000 of his own money, 20 years to pay back. The kind of investment a man makes when he is not planning to leave. "You've been in here all along," she had said, watching the slow movement of the water through the new channels, the fields already breathing differently. "You just never let anyone put you and the work in the same sentence." He had looked at her with that particular expression. "No," he said, "but you can, if you want to." She had wanted to. They were married at Kirkhope, in front of the tenants, because Eliza would not have it in a cathedral. Mrs. Pell stood with her, and Dr. Peel stood with him, and complained bitterly about the October wind throughout the entire ceremony. Tom came. He had polished his boots. Nathaniel offered to clear the remaining debt on the morning of the wedding, and Eliza said no, and Tom worked it off over 4 years at 9 shillings a week, and by the end of it, he was calmer and steadier than he had ever been, and he never did ask anyone for anything again. The boy was born in the spring. There was a second one after him, and then a girl, who turned out to be the worst of the 3 by some considerable margin, and inherited, it seemed, her mother's quality of stating plainly what she thought regardless of the effect, which Nathaniel found both exhausting and entirely wonderful, and said so frequently. Eliza kept the books. She kept them for 30 years, and she was better at it than any steward the estate had ever employed. And Nathaniel told her so once, and she said she knew and went back to her column. The drainage on the low fields came right in 1844, 22 years after it had been paid for, exactly as he had predicted. There was a school at Kirkhope with a stone over the door and a name on the stone that was not hers because she had said no to that too, and a master's house behind it that she had paid for over 11 years out of the household budget, one small sum at a time, without mentioning it to anyone. Nathaniel found out in '52 and had to leave the room. Gideon Vane inherited nothing, outlived none of it, and is not remembered. He had tried in the years that followed to make London remember the story of the clever housemaid and the broken duke and the ledger that got waved about in the drawing room. London listened politely, then forgot it, because London had better things to talk about by then, and because Ambrose Peel had done his work very thoroughly at those 4 dinners, and because people who visit estates and ask to see the books and the drainage records and the school at Kirkhope tend to come away talking about something different from what they went to find. Nathaniel still asked her in the evenings. He never entirely stopped. He would set down whatever he was reading and look across the study at her bent over the ledger, and he would ask, "Are you happy?" And Eliza Vane, Duchess of Ravenscroft, who had walked up that drive with 11 shillings and a bag and a brother she could not afford, and had said 4 days into her service, to a man everyone in England had decided was finished, "I intend to stay," would put down her pen and look at him over the top of it and say, "The books are straight, the roofs are on, there is not a soul in England brave enough to write to me." And then she would go back to her column. Some people leave a house, some people build one. Slowly, one honest thing at a time. A cleared debt, a school with no name on it, a record kept true for 30 years. History does not always write down the ones who do the quiet, necessary work. But the work remains, the fields drain, the children learn. The accounts balance. And sometimes in the evenings, a man looks across a study at the woman who looked him in the eye when no one else would, and asks the only question that ever mattered. She never answers it the way he expects. That is how he knows it is true.